Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive that I think you're going to find really interesting. We're going to be talking about content moderation and how online conversation has changed so much. Our source material is a pretty long interview with Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram and all that.
Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Threads, the whole thing. It's a really fascinating talk. He starts off talking about being a big supporter of free speech back in the early days of Facebook. Just let everyone say whatever they want. But then he talks about how over time he started facing all this pressure from governments and from the public to censor certain kinds of content. And he talks about how that whole experience really changed his thinking.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear him describe specific times when the Biden administration would reach out and urge Meta to, remove content that they thought was harmful or misleading. It really makes you think about the challenge of balancing free speech with being responsible about the content that's on these platforms.
Exactly, especially when you're dealing with billions of users like Meta is.
So let's rewind a bit, back to the early days of Facebook, back when cat videos were the biggest thing.
Oh yeah, I remember those days.
Zuckerberg's philosophy back then was basically, let people share what they want.
Yeah.
Free expression was a core value.
Right, and that worked pretty well for a while, at least in the first decade of Facebook, back when it was a much smaller platform. But as it grew, the challenges of content moderation just kept getting bigger.
And then 2016 happened.
Yeah.
And things really changed. Zuckerberg admits that he listened too much to the media. And looking back, he thinks that was a mistake.
Yeah, he talks about how that was part of a bigger trend of people losing trust in the mainstream media and more people turning to social media and other sources for news.
So Facebook was basically caught in the middle of all these competing narratives, with governments and the public wanting them to take sides and decide what's true and what's false. I can't even imagine the pressure of having to make those calls on a global scale like that.
No kidding. He talks about how he was being investigated by the government and even accused of harming people by not taking down certain content. It's obvious that all of that really affected him.
So how did Zuckerberg respond to all of this?
Well, he realized that he couldn't just stay hands-off anymore. And he became a lot more skeptical of the mainstream media, basically realizing that they weren't the only ones who got to decide what was true.
It's interesting. He talks about how the internet has shifted who people trust. It's not just the established institutions anymore. There's this whole new group of creators and voices emerging on social media, like influencers and independent journalists, and even just regular people. And they're often seen as more relatable and authentic than traditional media figures.
Yeah, like YouTubers, podcasters, people like that.
Exactly.
And that has huge implications for how we understand the world and what we believe.
It's not a top-down flow of information anymore. People are getting their news and their opinions from so many different sources.
Which can be good and bad. Yeah, for sure. It gives a voice to people who might have been ignored before. But it also makes it harder to know what to trust.
So that's the dilemma Zuckerberg was facing. How do you moderate content for billions of users while still respecting different viewpoints and protecting free speech?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
He talks about how hard it is to build AI systems that can actually tell the difference between harmful content and legitimate speech.
Right, especially with the sheer volume of stuff that's flowing through Facebook every day. He says it's impossible to be perfect.
And he even tells a story about how one of his own apps was temporarily taken down because it was flagged by mistake by their own content filters.
Oh.
So they're still working on getting it right.
Well, at least they're aware of the problem.
So how are they actually approaching content moderation at Meta? They're using a combination of AI, algorithms, and human reviewers.
I see.
Trying to combat misinformation and propaganda.
Right, and he talks about how important it is to get rid of those networks of fake accounts, like the bots and trolls that are trying to manipulate people.
Yeah, but he also defends the idea of anonymous accounts, saying that they're really important for whistleblowers and for people who might be in danger if they share their real identity.
That's a good point.
He says it's a trade-off between security and free speech.
Yeah, you can see how complicated this all is.
Zuckerberg also suggests that the U.S. government could help American tech companies navigate these global content moderation policies.
Interesting.
Because different countries have such different ideas about free speech, and it puts companies like Meta in a really tough spot.
Definitely.
So it's this constant balancing act. And you can tell that Zuckerberg's been wrestling with this for a long time. But, amidst all this serious talk about censorship and government pressure and the challenges of moderating content at this massive scale, there's this really unexpected personal thing that comes up in the interview. something I never would have expected from a tech CEO.
Oh, what's that?
He talks about how getting into Jiu-Jitsu and MMA training has completely changed his life.
Wait, hold on. Zuckerberg, the tech guy, is into martial arts.
Yeah, apparently he's pretty serious about it. He even talks about maybe having an MMA fight someday.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
I know, right? So what do you think he gets out of it?
Well, he talks about how it gives him this different kind of confidence, one that's based on physical ability and pushing himself beyond his limits.
He even compares it to having a superpower.
I guess when you think about the pressure he's under, the constant scrutiny, it makes sense that he'd want an outlet like that.
Totally. And it kind of connects back to his ideas about content moderation. It's like in jiu-jitsu, you have to constantly adapt your technique.
Yeah, to overcome new challenges.
And with content moderation, there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
It's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between protecting free expression and preventing harm.
Right. And it sounds like Zuckerberg is still figuring it out.
Always learning and evolving.
So in this first part of our deep dive, we've talked about Zuckerberg's early belief in free speech and how that belief was challenged and how his thinking on content moderation has evolved. And we even touched on his unexpected passion for martial arts.
What a combination. Tech CEO and martial arts enthusiast.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
And in the next part, we're going to dive into something else that's really interesting. Zuckerberg's vision for the future of artificial intelligence and how it's going to shape our world.
So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a wild ride.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about all the challenges Zuckerberg's been facing with content moderation and how his own views have changed over time. But he also spends a lot of time in this interview talking about the future and especially about his vision for AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he's really excited about AI.
Oh, yeah. He thinks it's going to completely change the world. How we live, how we work, everything.
So it's not just like another tech trend for him.
No, not at all. He sees it as like a fundamental force
Yeah.
that's going to reshape society.
What kinds of changes does he see happening?
Well, for one thing, he thinks AI is going to make us all way more creative and productive. He talks about a future where AI can help us with all sorts of complex tasks, like writing code or composing music, things that take a lot of time and brain power right now.
Yeah, for sure.
So instead of spending all our time on those things, we'll be freed up to focus on higher level thinking and coming up with new ideas.
That's pretty cool.
It's like having a super intelligent assistant that can help you with anything.
I bet Meta is putting a lot of resources into developing that kind of AI.
Oh, absolutely. He talks about how they're already using AI to improve their content moderation systems and to fight misinformation.
Right.
But he sees AI as having a much wider impact. It's not just going to be about social media.
He even predicts that AI will eventually be able to design and build most of the software we use.
Yeah, it's a little mind-blowing when you think about it.
And a little bit scary, too.
Yeah, because what happens to all the human software developers? If AI can do their jobs better.
That's a good question. What does Zuckerberg say about that?
Well, he doesn't shy away from the fact that some jobs will probably disappear. But he argues that new technologies have always created more jobs than they've destroyed.
So, like throughout history.
Exactly. He uses the example of the agricultural revolution. When machines started doing a lot of the work on farms,
Right.
that freed up a lot of people to go and do other things, which led to all sorts of new industries and jobs.
And he thinks the same thing will happen with AI.
Yeah, he believes AI will create jobs that we can't even imagine right now.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So besides jobs, what else does he talk about?
Well, he gets into some really specific examples of how AI could change our lives. Like, he talks about how AI could actually enhance our physical abilities.
Really?
Yeah, through things like neural interfaces.
What are those?
Basically, it's technology that connects your brain to a computer.
Wow.
He mentions that Meta's working on a wristband that can measure your neural activity.
So it can tell what you're thinking.
Kind of. The idea is that
Yeah.
eventually you'll be able to control computers with your mind.
No.
Yeah, instead of typing or tapping on a screen, you just think about what you want to do.
Yeah.
The computer does it.
That's insane.
It sounds like science fiction, but Zuckerberg's convinced it's going to happen.
What else could you do with that kind of technology?
Well, he talks about how it could help people with disabilities. Like someone with a spinal cord injury could use a neural interface to control a prosthetic limb.
Oh, wow. That would be life-changing.
Totally.
Yeah.
But he also sees neural interfaces becoming a normal part of everyday life for everyone.
So we'd all be walking around controlling computers with our minds.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He thinks it'll make our interactions with technology much more seamless and intuitive.
It's hard to even wrap my head around that.
I know. It's a pretty radical vision of the future.
Does he talk about any of the downsides of this kind of technology?
Yeah, he does. He acknowledges that there are risks, like the potential for misuse.
Yeah.
Or for people to become too dependent on technology. But he thinks the potential benefits outweigh the risks. And he emphasizes that Meta is committed to making these technologies accessible to everyone.
Not just the wealthy or the privileged.
Exactly. And that's where his support for open source AI comes in.
Right.
He believes that AI development should be open and collaborative so that everyone can benefit from it. And no one company or government can control it.
That makes sense.
He sees open source AI as a way to democratize the technology and ensure that it's used for good.
So it's not just about the technology itself.
Right. It's about how we develop it and who has access to it.
Okay, so let's get back to the idea of neural interfaces. How realistic is it that we'll all be controlling computers with our minds anytime soon?
Well, Zuckerberg admits that it's still a long way off,
Okay.
but he's confident that we're heading in that direction.
And he's putting his money where his mouth is.
Yeah, Meta is investing heavily in this research.
What about the idea of AI designing and building software?
He talks about that too. He says it's already happening to some extent, and that it's only going to accelerate in the coming years.
So what does that mean for human software developers?
Well, he thinks they'll need to adapt and focus on the more creative and strategic aspects of software development, the things that AI can't do.
It's going to be a really interesting transition to watch.
Yeah.
For sure. So we've talked a lot about AI as a tool, but Zuckerberg also sees it as a way to enhance our social interactions.
Especially in the metaverse.
The metaverse.
Yeah, that virtual world that he's been talking about.
Right.
He believes that AI will be crucial for creating realistic and engaging virtual experiences, where we can interact with other people in ways that feel natural and authentic.
So it's not just about putting on a VR headset and looking around.
No, it's about feeling like you're really there with other people.
He talks about being able to attend virtual concerts.
Yeah, or play games with friends, or even work together on projects, all within these immersive virtual environments.
That sounds pretty amazing.
But also a little bit weird.
Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, how much time do we really want to spend in virtual worlds?
That's a good question. Does Zuckerberg address that at all?
He does. He stresses the importance of maintaining a balance between our digital lives and our physical lives.
Which is interesting coming from the guy who's building the metaverse.
I know, right? But he seems to genuinely believe that technology can enhance our lives without taking over completely.
And this is where his interest in martial arts comes back in.
Right. He sees physical activity as a way to stay grounded and connected to the real world.
So it's not just about escaping into virtual reality.
No, it's about using technology to make our lives better, both in the physical world and the digital world.
That makes sense.
And Zuckerberg's vision for AI seems to be all about empowering people, giving them tools to overcome limitations and connect with each other in new ways, and ultimately create a more fulfilling future.
It's a pretty optimistic view of the future.
Yeah, definitely. But it also raises some really big questions about what it means to be human and how our relationship with technology is changing.
And those are the questions we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive. So stay tuned for that. All right, so we're back for the final part of this deep dive into Mark Zuckerberg's world. And this is where things get, I think, really interesting. We've talked about like the practical side of AI, the pros and cons, all that. But what about the bigger picture? How could AI actually change the way we understand ourselves? Like our relationships with each other and even our sense of reality.
Exactly. It's like we've been talking about AI as a tool, right? But Zuckerberg seems to think it's going to be way more transformative than that.
Yeah, he definitely hints at that when he talks about how the lines between the physical world and the digital world are blurring.
Right. And he seems to think that's a good thing.
Like it's inevitable and it's going to be beneficial.
Yeah, he talks about how AI could enhance our physical abilities and help us connect with the digital world more seamlessly, even interact with virtual beings as if they were physically present.
I mean, imagine a future where you're walking down the street and there are virtual objects and beings all around you. And you can interact with them just as easily as you interact with physical things.
It's kind of trippy when you think about it.
It really is. Like, what happens to our sense of reality in that kind of world?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It's like, are we headed towards a dystopia? where everyone's just plugged into virtual reality all the time.
Yeah.
Completely isolated from each other and detached from the real world.
Or are we headed towards something more utopian, where AI actually helps us solve problems
Yeah.
and connect with each other more deeply?
Zuckerberg seems to think we can make the right choices and avoid the dystopian outcome.
But he also says we have to be really careful about the ethical implications of AI.
Right, like we need to make sure that AI is aligned with human values.
Exactly, like fairness, transparency, accountability.
It's not just about building the technology
It's about building it the right way.
and making sure it's used for good.
He's really adamant about that. He keeps saying that we need to make sure everyone has access to AI, that it doesn't just become a tool for the powerful.
And that's why he's so big on open source AI development, right?
Yeah, he wants to democratize AI, make sure it benefits all of humanity.
It's a pretty noble goal.
It is. But even if we achieve that goal, there are still some really profound questions about how AI will change us.
Like, what does it mean to be human in a world where AI can do so many of the things we do?
Right, like what happens to our sense of purpose and identity?
Will we see AI as a threat or as an opportunity?
Zuckerberg definitely seems to see it as an opportunity.
He talks about AI as a superpower.
Yeah, a way to unlock human potential.
But it's important to remember that AI is still a tool.
It can be used for good or bad.
And the future of AI really depends on the choices we make.
About how we develop it and how we use it.
So it's up to us to shape that future. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored Zuckerberg's thoughts on content moderation and the changing landscape of trust and information, and his really ambitious vision for a future shaped by AI.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And we hope it's given you a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Because these are issues that are going to affect all of us in the years to come.
It's definitely a conversation that we all need to be a part of.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And we'll see you next time.